Throughout his ministry and life and teachings, Jesus was constantly leveling the playing field for people, for religious people and unreligious people, for insiders and outsiders, for Jews and Gentiles, for those who were considered holy and those who were considered unholy and untouchable, but especially between men and women. Now, you see this through all four Gospels, but you see it particularly clearly in Luke's Gospel, where Luke is constantly comparing Jesus' interaction with a man and his interaction with a woman. And in Luke chapter 8, beginning in verse 40, you see a remarkable encounter that Jesus had with a very important man, and then he's interrupted by a woman. And Jesus' reaction to both of these people in very different stations of life is very revealing for how we, his followers, should live our lives and treat other people. So Jesus is teaching, and this guy comes, this important figure comes, and he falls down at Jesus' feet and begs Jesus to come and heal his daughter. Now, this guy is the leader of a synagogue, meaning that he is a respected religious leader. And for him to fall at Jesus' feet was scandalous because Jesus was already a controversial figure with the religious leaders. And here this guy is falling at Jesus' feet, recognizing that, hey, we've heard that you've done all these miraculous things. Come and do it for my daughter. Now, his 12-year-old daughter was dying. So Jesus begins to go to this guy's house. And on his way, he's pressed in by this huge crowd of people. You've got his disciples. You've got crowds he was teaching. You've got people who heard that this guy is going to heal Jairus' daughter. And so the crowd is forming around him. But right in the middle of all the chaos, Jesus suddenly stops and says, "Somebody touched me." Now, Peter's reaction is classic. He's like, "Jesus, look around. I mean, there's so many people. Of course people touched you. Everybody's touching you." But Jesus said, "No, this is different. Somebody touched me and I felt the power go out of me." Well, there was this woman who had been bleeding for 12 years. She'd been sick. She'd spent all her money going to all these doctors and nobody could help her. And because she was bleeding, according to the Jewish customs and laws, she was an outcast. She was untouchable. So even the courage that she had to press through this crowd, touching people, and then touching Jesus by the hem of his garment was risky business. Not only could she have been in trouble with the religious leaders, but in fact, she could have been taken outside of town and stoned to death for intentionally going among this crowd and causing them all to become unclean by touching her. But she was so desperate that she just thought, if I could just touch the hem of his garment. So as Jesus says, "Who touched me?" she very cautiously, I'm sure she's afraid for her life, she acknowledges that it was her. She said, "If I could just touch the hem of your garment, I knew I would be made well." And Jesus says, "Your faith has made you well." And she was healed instantly after touching the garment. Now, this is also a pretty radical thing for her to do, because you see, it wasn't just that she touched the hem of his garment, it's that she touched the end of his prayer shawl. Jewish rabbis in that day wore this elaborate prayer shawl, and there were tassels off the end of it that were known as tzitzi. And when the rabbi would lift up his arms, the prayer shawl would look like wings. And this woman knew that there was an Old Testament prophecy by a man named Malachi that said, when the Son comes, he will come with healing in his wings. The fact that she reached out and touched the end of his prayer shawl was the acknowledgement that she knew this was the Son of God. Just like Jairus, that important religious leader, that synagogue ruler, falling at Jesus' feet was an important declaration. This woman's declaration was no less important. And what's amazing is that Jesus stopped and acknowledged her in that moment, just like Jesus acknowledged the religious leader. These are two different people from two very different stations of life. You've got a religious leader, a respected, important person, and you've got a woman who for 12 years has been isolated from everybody, including her own family. You've got somebody who's got power and influence and somebody else who's got no power and no influence. And in both cases, you see Jesus acknowledges them and acknowledges their faith. When he calls out to them, they respond to him, and Jesus responds to them as well. Well, Jesus goes on towards Jairus' house only to hear that the daughter's already dead. But he tells Jairus, he said, just have faith. And so Jesus goes and raises his daughter from the dead. This is an incredible story. And you know, it teaches us something important, that Jesus responds to our roguish acts of faith. Both of these people took a radical step towards Jesus. The man, because he could have lost all his power and prestige, his office as a leader of the synagogue by the religious establishment of his day, he was taking a huge risk by falling at Jesus' feet. The woman, by reaching out and touching Jesus' garment, was taking a huge risk that she could have been kicked out of the town. She could have been stoned to death. Both of them were acting rogue as they reached out to Jesus, and Jesus responded to both of them. Jesus is not impressed by your position or your power or your influence. He's looking for faith, and he saw it in both of these people. But the other thing this tells me is that sometimes coming to Jesus means we have to lower ourselves to his feet. And sometimes coming to Jesus means we let Jesus lift us up. You see, this man Jairus was a man of stature. He would have never put himself down prostrate in front of somebody's feet unless that person was God. So this man lowered himself in front of Jesus. Meanwhile, this woman who came desperate and lowly and forgotten allowed Jesus to lift her up out of obscurity to be recognized by everybody. You have one person being lowered and the other person being lifted, and both of them are on level ground before Jesus. I don't know who you relate more to. Maybe it's Jairus. Maybe you're a person of influence, of power, of wealth. Maybe you've got some status or some privilege, and you recognize that in order for you to come to Jesus, you're gonna have to lower yourself. You're gonna have to humble yourself before him. But maybe you're more like this woman. You're desperate, you're needy. You have no power, no influence at all. And what you need to do is let Jesus lift you up. And we recognize that all ground is level ground at the foot of the cross. Grace and peace be with you.